WBUR Podcast, Boston.
This is Up Next. I'm Tiziana Deering. Getting around Boston will be even less fun than usual this summer. Parts of Storrow Drive are closed nightly through the end of August, and the T is seeing disruptions for construction work as well, with more coming. Let's talk about what to expect and how or if this summer's repairs actually will make our transportation systems better in the future. Terry Regan teaches transportation policy at Boston University, joins us now. Terry, good morning.
Good morning.
I was struck when I heard the news about Storrow Drive being closed at night, pieces of it, right? Every night till 5 a.m. until the end of August. I feel like I'll never really get used to this. Did it surprise you that we would chunk, out a piece like that and close it every night for part of the summer?
Well, not really. Storrow Drive is it's 75 years old. That tunnel portion is falling apart, and this fix is only a temporary interim fix. The state is looking at a longer term. You're going to have to totally rebuild it. So,
Wait, what does that mean? If you have to totally rebuild it, so people will deal with a temporary shutdown at night over this summer. But are you saying that we're looking at a time when you won't be able to get around on Storrow Drive for X amount of time because that tunnel has to be rebuilt?
I'd say we're going to see in the next decade a project come forward in which you have to totally rebuild that tunnel, and that would take, I would think, 1 to 2 years.
So I can hear the collective sigh of commuters, Terry. I remember, and we'll touch on the T a little bit here. We'll come back to the T more in a minute. But I remember the first shutdown of the T after the Orange Line fire several years ago, and how stunning it was. And then there was a partial shutdown on 93 when there was an overpass bridge that needed to be repaired. And at the time, the conversation seemed to be, how did we get to a point where we can't maintain our infrastructure while we use it? Is this unusual, Terry?
Well, no. And the reason is physical assets like bridges and tunnels and subway stations have a useful life. So a bridge typically is around 75 years. A tunnel is around 50 years. A subway station is around 35 years. So if you're doing your job right, take a subway station, every 35 years you should be going in there and doing major improvements.
And so people should just expect, even in a place like Boston where traffic and congestion and sometimes waits on the T, et cetera, are tough, that this is just a part of the rhythm of our transportation lives.
One of the things to realize about Boston and Massachusetts, we have old infrastructure. We started building things back in the 1630s. Boston has the oldest subway system in the Americas. Those things age out. And what you need to do is have an aggressive program in which you preserve and rehabilitate your asset.
So preserve and rehabilitate means hold on to what you've got and make it better. And that makes me think of the MBTA, since Phil Eng, the general manager, who, by the way, is the interim state transportation secretary as well, took over the T. One of the hallmarks is that he kind of came to the public and said, listen, here's the deal I'll make with you. You put up with shutdowns and diversions, and I will get this T running on time better and again, right? I'll fix old tracks, I'll fix signals, et cetera. And he seems to be making progress on that. I was therefore really struck by some data from a MassInc polling group survey that came out within the last week that said about 80% of respondents said the condition of the MBTA, of the T, is fair or poor. And about 62% said they feel the T is about the same or worse than it was before. Is the T the same or worse than it was before? And is it in poor condition still?
Well, so one, start with, it's the oldest transit system in the country. Two, we went for a good decade or more with focusing on expansion rather than maintenance. I'm 100% behind what the GM is doing in terms of focusing on rehabilitation.
Let me just pause you there to explain for people, when you say expansion instead of maintenance, remind us what the expansion was.
Okay, we spent $2 billion on the Green Line extension. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we spent almost nothing on fixing current Green Line. I personally think we ought to spend most of our dollars on maintaining what we have rather than expanding.
And how long, at the pace of repair and at the pace of closures and work that Phil Lang, the general manager of the MBTA, has put forward and has been engaged in since he came on board, right? How long before you think we get to a place where we are in a state of good repair? Because if I recall, he came out with a plan a couple of years ago for what that would take, and it was billions of dollars that we don't necessarily have.
The sad answer is it's never ending. If you have to rebuild something every 30, 40, or 50 years, and you have hundreds of those assets, you're constantly going to be rebuilding. Think about if you owned 100 homes. You're going to be replacing a roof every single year on one of those homes. You're going to be inconveniencing somebody with that kind of improvement. It is a sad fact, but if you have an expansive network, it takes a huge amount of money and a long time to make these improvements.
We're also looking at some significant shutdowns or diversions on the Green Line as part of an effort to bring all of the stations up to compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And by the way, the MBTA compares favorably, for example, against New York or Chicago when it comes to that level of accessibility. But Symphony Hall Station will be closed for 3 years. I feel like I'm almost keep saying, but what about? And you keep saying, well, this has to be done. Is there any sense of, yeah, but this is really hard for people to live through?
Well, certainly. But looking at Symphony, it was built in 1941, 85 years ago. Think about any asset you've owned that's 85 years old that you haven't had to spend a lot of money to fix up. So there's that. Symphony Hall is also really complex. It's actually 2 separate subway stations because when they built it back in the 40s, they also put a roadway right through the middle. So Huntington Avenue goes right through. So, and they've already actually been working on Symphony for 3 years, doing all the utility relocations.
Well, so the message is, folks, it just takes a lot. I want to thank Terry Regan of Boston University for joining us this morning. We're going to continue to keep you posted, all the time, every time when we're experiencing diversions, traffic shutdowns because of roads, rays, et cetera. Terry, thanks for joining us this morning.
Quite welcome.
And thanks to you for listening to 90.9 WBUR's Morning Edition. We're coming up on 10 o'clock. I'm Tiziana Deering.